Hi, Katie. We're still waiting on Yashu. Let's see what happens. Yay! Hey,
What's
Yashu.
up, everybody? Hey, hey. What's up, everyone? It's your girl, Yashu. Welcome, welcome. Bring it
Hi.
on.
I think I just want to make sure your head is cut up till here, so you know that, right? Because last time you were like, "Oh, yeah, there you go. You're good now. You're in the frame. You look good."
Of course, we bring in that sexual energy today as we enter into our theme for the month of January for, of course, a Desi talk. Thank you all so much for tapping in. Are you excited?
I am. We're going to be talking about sexuality, which is awesome. Hey, Catalina. And I'm very excited for this month. I did kind of give Katie a brief rundown because she was here before. But basically, what we're going to be talking about this month, which is, I don't know, Yashu, do you want to tell our viewers?
Yes. So today, specifically, we're going to be talking about sexuality as it is the theme for our month. And over the course of this month, on every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific time and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be coming to you guys live to talk about different aspects of sexuality, whether that's gender identity, that it has to do with any type of sexual objectification. We're going to talk about sexual practices, and we're going to wrap up this month with a sex workshop hosted by yours truly, a free sex workshop. So y'all better tap in for some sex education. We're going to dive into the science of sex, and we're also going to talk about some practices that we can do for ourselves, both men and women. So be sure to tap in for that as well. So, ooh.
I love that. I think this culminating to a sex education class by you is a really great way to actually just talk about sexuality because so much of it tends to be repressed in Indian cultures and South Asian cultures. We don't talk about it so openly, and we don't get sex education from our parents. So a lot of what we learn about sex and how or like what that means is through our watching media, like by actually experiencing things ourselves, negative or positive. So like having someone like you when I was younger would have been so amazing because I felt like I had no idea what was going on. And so I'm really glad that that's like how this is going to end. I just want to start off with talking a little bit about what gender is, what sexuality is, and what sex is. Um, this is like a very so I did my master's in anthropology, so I'm going to give a really quick rundown of this. So sex being maybe the sex that you're assigned at birth might usually it's like a scientific, it's denoted by science. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's just usually like if you have a penis, you're a man. If you have a vagina, you're female. So that is the sex at birth. And a lot of people might not identify with the sex they're given, but that is just so you know, that's how we use that. And then gender being the how you perceive yourself, how you feel like you interact with the world. That could be male, female, anything in between, non-binary. So I feel more non-binary than male or female, even though I present very female. So that's like, it's just a spectrum, just like sexuality. So now moving into sexuality, which we'll be talking about today, is also a spectrum. You can be potentially a male attracted to other men, a female attracted to other females, a trans person attracted to males, a trans person attracted to female. So it just goes through this whole spectrum of things. And honestly, gender is very fluid. Sexuality is very fluid. So you could just, you could say I feel very straight. I feel very heteronormative or heterosexual. And then maybe you find yourself attracted to one woman in your life and you're like, okay, like I guess maybe I am on this spectrum of like being attracted to women as well. um, and also sexuality can just not even just be just gay and straight, but you could be pansexual, you can be all these other things in between. So this is just a little crash course for anybody that's watching and doesn't know. Um, so yeah, Yeshu, I think I did a pretty good job of giving a little bit of background information. So let's start talking about
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. And as we dive into the different topics over this month, I know that we have a segment that will be specifically on gender identity. And on that day, we're actually going to give you guys the formal definitions from directly LGBTQ.org. We're going to go directly to the source of the different foundations that support this education. So you guys will get the formal definitions of the different kinds of identities that are out there. Because I feel like there's such a misrepresentation, and people use terms so fluidly when it might not even be appropriate. So I think it's very important that we take time to do that. So be sure to tap in for that. But yes, coming back to today's topic, which is, talking about sexuality as a whole, and talking about sexuality from the Desi perspective, right? I know that there is a certain type of conservation or conservative approach when it comes to talking about sex. There's a taboo about it. There's a stigma behind it, and being able to practice healthy sexual relationships. So I feel like in this day and age, and also looking back at like older generations, seeing what they went through, one of the most classic things that my mom always used to tell me is, Yashu, it's not just you. Don't forget, we were your age at one point as well. And that really hits me because it makes me think like, okay, maybe they didn't take the steps that I took, in my life and explored the way I explored, but that doesn't mean that their biology changes in any way and that maybe they didn't have any feelings for anyone or they didn't have any urges at any point in their life. I don't believe that. I'm sure they did. So being able to respect that, and then also finding a healthy platform or a healthy way to converse about these topics. I know over the past couple of months when we've been hosting, we've gotten such great feedback from all of our viewers, about different topics that we talk about. And we really dove into sex education here and there, and people really resonated with it. People really came with their questions, which is why having the sex education class, the workshop at the end of our month is going to be so valuable. So be sure to save that date. It's in the comments. Saturday, January 30th, okay? And it's going to be an evening class so that people who are in the West Coast, in East Coast, in India, I don't know where y'all at, but y'all can tap in for that. It's going to be a discussion. It's going to be a non-judgmental zone, and it's going to be an opportunity for us to talk about our sexual experiences and be honest and open.
Yeah, that said, like obviously you can still put your comments in the chat right now so we can talk about how you're feeling about sexuality and sex in general, potentially your gender identity, whatever it is. You can always put that out here. And then if you attend the class, you'll get a little bit more insight, which is always good. So yeah, Yeshu, growing up, like what was it like for you like what was sexuality to you? Like how did you think about it? What was it that you knew about it? How did you explore that aspect of yourself?
So for me, it's so funny because I would say that for me, I was kind of a late bloomer, but at the same time, I wasn't either. I was a late bloomer in the sense that I was very innocent, so I really didn't know about a lot of things. Like for the longest time, didn't know where babies came from. I didn't know sex was the practice that helped in that process of making children and what, like I didn't know any of this stuff. And how many of you viewers, go ahead and comment below, but how many of you had Desi parents who would not give you permission to go to sex ed class? Because my parents wouldn't let me go to sex ed class, right?
I had to convince my parents. I was like, if you don't let me go, then I have to write a paper, and I don't want to write a paper. So then they were like, fine, like do whatever you want. But like, it definitely took a little bit of like, please let me go to this thing. And I wonder if now, like as adult, like they've learned so much in all this time, if they would still have the same response. Because I actually don't feel like they would say no now. I don't think so. But like back then, they felt very strongly about not letting me go to these things. And also it was a co-ed space. So like we did sex education at my school in 8th grade, and I remember it was like all guys and girls in like one room, and my parents were like, no, you should not be learning about that like with guys there and blah blah blah. And I was like, if you don't let me go, I'm like, I'm literally not going to go to school. So then they let me like do it. I was
No,
super
my mom was
annoyed.
straight up like, no, I'm not signing this. No. So for me, like I never went through the formal training. And I think especially, I think when it, because I think they do a sex ed class in like middle school for us. Like elementary school is not sex ed, but it's more about like puberty and stuff. And I
Mm,
believe my mom like let me go through that one, but the one in middle school, she did not let me. And I think in high school, I needed like one more credit or something was going on. And I took like a
mm.
summer crash course or like a summer school course about sex education. And that was my first time. I was just like, whoa, chlamydia. I've only heard about this. I've only heard that word in Mean Girls, like, you know. So for me, it was definitely a different experience growing up in a Desi household. And we have a comment here saying very similar to the Hispanic culture. Ah,
Hmm.
that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And that's one of my close friends, Katia, who is located in the DMV area. So that's very interesting to see that, you know,
Mm,
even in different cultures, we're seeing parents being a little restrictive on how open they are about communicating about sex. Now, my
hmm.
follow-up question is, how many of your parents had to talk? Um, birds and the bees, like how many of your parents actually went through that process of like, this is a
Telling you
condom,
about
right?
it. I mean, I never got the birds and the bees talk like ever. I think my parents told me that my brother came from Costco and I believed it for a very long time. I was like, oh yeah, they went and got him from somewhere. I don't know where.
Oh my God.
Well, I was also young, I want to say. I was
Right.
like young, but like I didn't know, so I was just like, okay, like whatever. And then like obviously when we had sex education in eighth grade, I learned that that's not where my brother came from.
Right.
Um, but I think like sexuality, like talking about sex is it's interesting because then it leads into like how you view yourself sexually, right? Like how do you interact with people of the opposite sex or opposite gender or whatever you want to call it, like it really dictates a lot of our lives and we don't think about it. Like how people perceive me and like how then they like talk to me has everything to do with how they think I look, and you know, like whether I look female or male or whatever. And then the next step is like how do you then move forward in a relationship if they view you that way. And like, you know, the I will say like I when I started dating in college, because I in high school I really didn't understand any of it. I was like, I I don't know. My parents never talked to me about it, so I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna like do school and like live my life and like not worry. Because I also thought I was asexual at that point. I really, because again, we never had a open conversation um about this. Oh, so Catalina says that her mom talked to her sister in the second grade because she developed early, and then she talked to you. So she talked to you about it when you got your period. So did she talk to you? Sorry, this question's to my friend Catalina. Did she talk to you about sex and like what that means? Or did she just talk to you about like getting your period? Because I feel like those are two separate things. What do you think, Yashu?
Yeah, for sure. I think puberty is handled in a completely different way, especially me coming from a South Indian community. Puberty is like celebrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom went through the whole, like, you know, you call the village to the home and then it's the first time that you wear a sari. And like my mom went whole, like all out when it came to this. So
Mm-hmm.
sex was never a conversation. I never had a conversation about sex growing up. So, I think it's very interesting to see how some parent like and I think it has to do again with generation and parents and how open they are. I felt like certain parents who maybe jump certain hurdles in their life, or I see like for example people who like did the love marriage thing were more inclined to have these conversations versus people who
Mm,
are more orthodox
yeah.
like my
Well, so
family were
so
not.
yeah, Shelby says that her mom had the talk with her when she was 5. So like I think your familial experience is like how, you know, what your parents went through really dictates when they probably are going to have that conversation with you. I'd actually like to know, Catalina, if like why did your mom have that conversation? Because I know that, you know, like your friend Katya said that like Hispanic culture is also a little bit conservative. So it's interesting to hear that there might be a spectrum within cultures of like how open people are to having these
Yeah. And even
conversations.
religion, right? Like, I was having this conversation with someone else earlier. Religion plays a huge part too. What kind of orthodox familial,
Hmm.
things you come from, and how that plays a huge role, and how that really stems a lot of this like conservative nature about sex. How
Hmm.
in some cultures like sex is forbidden, like it's a sin, and so
Hmm.
being told that repetitively throughout your whole life. Just to give kind of a context, how many of you guys know the show Jane the Virgin? I know, like in that show, they always show these like flashbacks of Jane as a young girl and her grandma giving her a flower and then saying,
Hmm.
"This is you," and then she crushes the flower to show like, and this is what happens if you have sex, like, and that kind of stays in Jay's mind, and it has a really big influence. Now, I don't know how accurate this is with like the
Hmm.
Hispanic Latino culture, but that's just like showing you as an example. And I feel like for me, the Desi thing, right? My mom, like, especially once I got a little older and I think she knew what I knew what sex was, the conversation in my household, or like what my mom would be like, she would say like, she'd be like, don't be having sex, okay? Like, and then, but the thing is, she's like, you're not supposed to do that with like other people like that. You're not
I'm
supposed to do
surprised.
things like
I'm surprised she said sex, because my parents are
that.
like,
No,
"Don't be intimate," And I don't even think they still acknowledge that I could potentially be a sexual person, which is honestly like I don't know what to think about that because like I don't know if they're ready for those conversations. I don't think they're ready for sexuality and sex conversations, even though it's so funny because I was actually just talking to my partner and he was like, do your parents know that you're like non-binary, pansexual, like that you're like this?" And I'm like, honestly, I don't think they know, but I've never actively told them, but also it's available on all my social media. I'm like never hiding it. I talk about it all the time to everybody I know. Like I'm not like hiding it, but I never openly talk to them. And so it's like they seek what they want, they see what they need.
right.
Like, you know what I mean? They don't want to have those conversations, so we just don't. And it's very
Mhm.
like it's a problem when you're a kid. And I mean, also like my friend Catalina said her mom had that conversation with her, but not about sexuality. And I think this is like a very good point to bring up because like even if they did have the conversation about sex, which I'm so maybe Yashu they did with you, it's like don't do it, right? Don't have it.
Mhm.
It's not about like what does sexuality mean? Like what is
Right.
consent? Like what should you allow? How do you say
Mhm.
no? Like how do you say yes? Like what does
Mhm.
that mean? Like I feel like I had no context. So when I went to college and I had to like interact with people and deal with myself in sexual settings, I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know what was right. I was scared all the time. I felt embarrassed because I was a virgin for quite some time. And I wasn't embarrassed of it for myself. I was embarrassed because I didn't know how to communicate it. And other people then projected their opinion of that on me. Like, like,
Absolutely. And I think that's so important that you said that. And I'm going to say it one more time, guys. People might have had the education about sex as an act, but they didn't get the prerequisites of it or the knowledge that surrounds sex. Sex is literally the verb, the act. But there's so much more that goes into
mhm.
sexuality. There's so much that goes into the practice of sex that we're very much not aware of. So just to give you guys some context, right? A lot of times we see, for example, like people maybe getting arranged marriages in our culture. And it's a lot of times that you see that parents will say like, okay, your husband is going to do something with you now and don't object him. You're going to, like, literally, this is the conversation they have. Like, don't say
Mhm.
no to what he says. This is what has to happen. This is how children are born. So just he'll know what to do. Just cooperate and go through with it. And so women are just like, okay, I guess I will. Oh, okay. So I take my sari off now. Oh, okay. So it's like, it's very
And
methodical. And
I want to know in Indian culture, you're supposed to have sex on your wedding night. Like, you're not supposed to say no. Not only that, you literally don't know the person, supposedly. And you're supposed to have sex with them. Your parents set up the sexual experience for
it's
you.
not
So
even
they
just that
literally,
night. There's literally, if you follow the Orthodox tradition, they have a specific time that
yeah.
penetration is supposed to happen at. So they say like at exactly 11:19 p.m. Make sure you're penetrating. So it's like, it's that
Yeah.
specific.
It's that specific, and then it's like really curated. Like your parents set up the room that you're gonna have sex in, like they put like petals and shit and like decorate the whole room. Not only that, because a lot of family structures, which was our last point of conversation, is that you live at home, you live with your parents, and so they're in the room next to you while you're supposed to be doing this thing. And the craziest thing is I remember my grandma talking to me about getting married to my grandfather, and
Oh,
she got
her
married to him,
again.
I think, my grandma.
Yeah, yeah, gotcha.
So my grandma got married to my grandfather, yes. And basically she said to me that like she was six, I think she was 15 or 16 when she got married. And my grandfather was 20 something, like late 20s. So definitely like a huge age gap, right? And she was told the night before her wedding, just do the thing and be careful. Nothing else. She told me that. She was like, "Oh yeah, they just told me like be ready and like blah blah and like just, you know." And I'm like, "Literally somebody told you just be ready to do a thing." And then this
Right.
bitch was ready to do the thing. Like I would not be ready. I was
Right.
like,
Now, with that being said, like, I know we've got viewers who are from a slightly older generation, right? I know for a lot of people, like, that moment is also very sacred and special.
mm-hmm,
And I definitely want to touch on that. Like, even though it came from like a very, for us, younger generation, where there's more communication, there's more education, there's more openness, you know, when it comes to this
mm-hmm.
conversation, we have to remember that the older generation didn't have that.
Didn't have
And it
that,
was
yeah.
very familial. Like, it was very past, like, listen, like, it was kind of a tradition. It is a tradition. It is a sacred energy exchange. It was very spiritual. And I think my mom always used to tell me this too, like, even through like telling me about the different like scriptures in our culture, right? How they say like you shouldn't have sex when you're angry. You shouldn't have sex when you're angry because like, and then they have a story from our scriptures. Like, if you're, you know, in the Hindu scriptures that talk about a story how there was a god who was angry, and then they had sex during this, and the result of that was a demon baby, right? Or something like that. Not to say it in the evil way, but this was the personification of saying, like, you know, having sex when you're angry is not good. But then having sex at like the early morning hours is very beneficial. And like, you know, different ways that, so for them, that was the source of education, right? Like listening to these stories, or the
Mm-hmm,
grandparents or whoever, the older generation, educating them about sexual practices through these different stories. Now, very
mm-hmm,
often, you know, we hear about Kama Sutra. I feel like the Indian community is just like, oh, sex, Kama Sutra. And I feel like that's like the immediate connection that's made. But I don't
mm-hmm.
think people really take time to really understand what that even is, what it means. And then is it like, y'all think that Indian people are like, all right, let me bring out the book. Oh, okay, we gonna do this tonight. Okay, yeah, okay, all right, step one, step two. Okay, I got it. Let's go. No, that's not how sex works. Okay. So I feel like that's also something really important. And one last thing that I want to drop in here, and I want to get your perspective on this, and for all the viewers who are tapping in, be sure to comment below. Let us know what your thoughts are. And I see people here tapping in, interesting with the popcorn. I am happy you are here tonight enjoying this conversation about perception of sexuality in the Desi communities and cultures. But I want to know your perspective about sex appeal, because I feel like this is a huge topic, and we see like sex appeal even going as far as like pornography and how it's perceived in the Indian or Desi in general community, right? Going from, you know, seeing Bollywood actresses dressing a certain way and that kind of stuff, and then us women at home, especially if you're from an Orthodox family, being told like, you're showing way too much skin, like, you know, like that's not appropriate, to people when, for example, the Nirbhaya rape case, which was a
Mm-hmm.
huge rape case that had happened. There was a young lady who was raped in India by a group of men, and it was one of the most brutal attacks that had ever happened against women in India. And it was really sad. Like the whole situation was sad. But during the interview, or you know, the court case interviews that they had of the people who were the suspects or whoever, them saying like, yeah, she was wearing a skirt. That's like an open invitation to have sex. And I'm just like, wait, since when is
I
wearing
thought
a
it wasn't
skirt?
even, I don't even think she was wearing a skirt. He said that she was out past dark.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah. Something
specifically what he said. The guy who they found a group of guys not connected. They like figured out these dudes actually committed the crime. And they were interviewing them for this documentary, which you should totally watch, called India's Daughter. It's horrible and horrific, but they actually do interview the guy, and he says, like, I don't see anything wrong with what happened because, like, she was out past dark with a male. So this woman, a well-educated woman who was trying to be a doctor, doesn't matter if you're not doing those things. I'm just saying, in India, the perception is if you're good, you do all these things. You're educated, you dress a certain way, you interact with people a certain way. She was not doing anything that they claimed to be weird, other than the fact that she was out past the time that it, like, you shouldn't be out with a man, which was like 9 or 8 or 9. And
and
it
I think
gets,
she went to a movie or something
she
like
went
that.
to
Like
a
she went,
movie,
yeah,
yeah. And the movie ended late, so they were trying to find a bus. And now this is like a whole other thing, but in India, public transit is like weird, and there's private buses and public buses, and they took a public bus, which is technically, I don't know how to explain it. It's really a private bus. And these drunk dudes were driving around. They're from the slums in Delhi, and they're not educated, they don't have jobs, they have nothing going on. And so they just thought, hey, let's rape this woman. And it was a very, very bad, like one of the worst, yeah, like cases that we've ever heard. Not to say that this doesn't happen to, I mean, we just heard about like all these Dalit women who have been raped and abused and all that. The thing is, I think the reason this case got prominence is because she was from like not a well-to-do family, but she was like what is perceived as like a good Indian girl,
right.
and they figured out who had done it. And I think that doesn't normally happen in India. So yeah, those ideas of sexuality, what you can do, with men and like all that, that obviously translates to the U.S. as well, because our parents are like first generation immigrants with the same ideas, the same mindsets, and our parents don't think like you should be raped if you're out past dark, but like the
Right.
idea that you're doing anything with
I think
men,
exactly.
dating, yeah, that's
Mhm.
like problematic, right? So,
Absolutely. And also like I remember like growing up, my parents would be like, women are not supposed to be going out like that. Cultured women are not supposed to be
mhm,
leaving the house. And I would always just be like, but I can't just sit at home. Like that's not me. I need to be one going out, do it. Like I'm not, it's not like I was going on dates or like seeing men or whatever. I was just like going to Walmart,
but
buying
also
my
why
mom
not?
something. Right.
Why not? Like, like exploring yourself, understanding your sexuality, what you're comfortable with, what you want, who you want to date. Like, that's all a part of the process. And I think we talked about this in before, where it's like, it's like you're not supposed to date until you're like basically 30, and then you should be married. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I like. I don't know anything. You can't expect someone to go from 0 to 100,
Right.
and it's,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
kind of touching base, like coming back a little bit, just because I know these are really important. And like I said, guys, we're gonna talk more about them in detail over the course of the month, every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So be sure to set notifications, India.current. You can follow me, the Yashu Rao, and of course Srishti here as well. But just to shed some light as well, like even the concept of like pornography. I know pornography has become this like political thing in India,
Mm.
political religious thing where they've gone as far as to banning pornography in India. And that makes me feel bad because not only are you cutting sex education in a way through pornography, but you're also, there's so many people out there where first of all, you can't even sit next to a woman, going through
Mhm.
school and stuff. You can't talk to a girl
Mhm.
growing up. Okay. So once you hit puberty, like you're gonna have these sexual urges. And now you're banning porn. So what am I supposed to do with all of this urges and hormones and bodily things that I need to get out? And
It's
that's
such a
why.
repressed culture, yeah. And I want to note
Mhm.
that India was not always like this. Indian culture was not always like this. Colonialism was a huge reason why. Like obviously you talked about the Karma Sutra. Why did that exist? If you go to a temple in India, look up like the Sun Temple in India, and basically they have pornographic images on on the temple. Like it's just like men and women having sex all over. And that's because it used to be a religious experience. It used to be
It's
something
a
very,
spiritual energy exchange.
yeah, it was
It's
something very,
something very,
go ahead, go ahead.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Like sex was not just an act, a act of lust, right? Sex was a very sacred exchange. It was a very important part in the development of a relationship. Oftentimes, like for example, we always talk about, if you look at, for example, Hindu culture, we look at like Indian goddesses and gods, and we always show that they're counterparts to each other, just as an
Yeah.
example. But you know,
And you
even
show them, they're depicted without their clothes a lot of the time. Not even sexualizing their
absolutely.
body, but just like showing who they are. Like they're both male, female, you know, like you, like, yeah, all of these, a lot of them are
Mhm.
both, right? Durga is like a form of another god. And like all these people are taking Shiva, right? I don't want to say that wrong, but I think Durga is
Yeah.
another form of Shiva. So there you go. Like you have a male and a female version of the same thing. And like really, really, I want to emphasize colonialism is the reason the concepts of sexuality and openness changed. That is messed up. It is messed up that Western narratives now run how people view women, how we view sexuality and sex. Like it is repressed now, but it didn't used to be. And like
And even
you
if
gotta
you look at some old scriptures, right? If you look at some old Hindu scriptures, so many topics about sexuality are talked about. Sex
Mhm.
before marriage is talked about. Um, Premarital pregnancy is talked about in our religious scriptures. We
Mhm.
have seen all of these topics. So even when people say like, oh, like you Indian, like y'all probably don't talk about sex, y'all probably not open about this, or your culture is probably very conservative, or your culture probably doesn't, you know, that's not true. At one point in our culture, we were very educated and fluid about the communication of the different sexual identity. We even have bisexual natures written in our scriptures. We have scriptures that kind of mention, you know, homosexuality
Yeah.
in our scriptures. Like if you really take
Yeah.
time to
You have
read.
Thirungai women and Hijra women who were like idolized. And now they are like a shell of that because like so if you don't know what Hijra and Thirungai women are, they're trans women and they are people will ask them to bless their kids because supposedly their blessings mean a lot, but they're also the people that are on the streets begging for money. Like now, that's the case now. Like people will ask them to come into their home to bless their babies and give them a little bit of money because they need money. But back in the day, they were revered. Like who they were was revered. The fact that we embody both male and female aspects is not a new one. And it is shown,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's shown like all, not like you said, scripture, it through sculptures, through, if I do Kathak and I know you do Bharatanatyam, right? Yashu and,
Like,
oh, sorry, but Kuchipudi, right? Is
yeah.
that what you said? Oh, sorry, Kuchipudi. And in both of those, like a lot of times we embody male and female characters. And that's like a huge part of the dance is like knowing that you're both. And like the fact that these things come from, you know, text and religious text and like generations of knowledge. And then now those are things that we are not allowed to talk about, not allowed to embody, not allowed to be is like insane to me.
Now, with
Yeah.
that being said, and this will kind of be our way to kind of wrap up the conversation. Again, guys, if you found this conversation super informative, helpful, wait till you get more content coming up through the other weeks. Be sure to comment below, DM india.currents if you want more information. And again, Saturday, January 30th, free sex workshop where I will be taking you guys through sex education. We'll be talking about sexual practices, hygiene, and then conversations. We're going to have a discussion. We're going to talk about, well, how do you tell your man you want to get it on? How do you tell your woman you want to get it on? Healthy conversation and communication as well. So be sure to save that date in your calendar as well. But kind of, you know, to say one more thing here, right? When it comes to even sexual practices, and again, like you were saying, the balance between the feminine and the masculine, and identifying that, and then using our scriptures as personifications for that, or the different architecture that show us, the art pieces that show us. I think it's so important to also say that now, fast forward to this generation, right, where not many people are educated about these things, right? And now sex is just an act, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of stripping away from that spiritual experience that sex can be. Not to say that you can't have sex just to have sex, or you can't have sex to, fulfill your lust or your needs or whatever, but then also being sure that you're educating yourself and actually diving into seeing how powerful sex can be, what sex really can bring out in the other person and
Mm-hmm.
in yourself. And I think that's where we see this difference, where there's like the older generation where they're telling you this is a really sacred act, guys, and then a newer generation which is like, girl, I'm in my house, and then
Mm-hmm.
where's that middle ground where you can kind of meet both, have a sexual conversation, a safe, sacred exchange, while also being able to fulfill your needs, which I think is super important.
I totally agree. I think like we talked about at the very beginning, sexuality is a spectrum, sex is a spectrum. There's so many ways to go about having sex, and exploring your sexuality, and don't be beholden to what you see in media, right? Like if you I think like that's kind of been our theme for a lot of our conversations is like I definitely, I definitely didn't follow the trend that I saw in media, like you have to date, you have to do this and that, you have to do this and that. And like I said earlier, I was a virgin for quite some time before I was like, yeah, fuck it. And it wasn't like I'm not unhappy with my decisions. I'm very okay with everything that's ever happened to me. But I think having open dialogues that people are different and not everyone needs to have sex on the third date or a first date or like whatever, and like how you interact with people can be different. I think that's a huge part of it. And then also bringing in the fact that like our culture and our heritage informs us of how to do those things, and like other people being cognizant of that, whether you're Hispanic or Indian or other South Asian or like, anything like on that spectrum, like it everyone will interact differently because we've been taught from like our roots. And like I think like we're animals at heart, so like, and not at heart biologically we're animals, so there's some amount of like behavioral training that just comes from like your actual lineage, I think, which that's like, this is another topic, but like just to think about, like, yeah, of course, like Indian people will have different responses versus, others. And like, you got to be mindful of that. Not everyone's going to respond the way that you like, and having the dialogue is most important. So I think we've done the first step of that.
Yeah,
um,
everyone is different, right? At the end of the day, that is the most important thing. And I think India Currents, myself, and Srishti can definitely say, like, we're all different people and we're all on a different space in our journey and our lives and our exploration. I think one of the most important things by having conversations like this is being able to communicate, especially like women being able to voice themselves, people from the transgender community being able to voice themselves, people from, other communities being able to voice themselves and be able to say, hey, listen, this is who I am. I think, one of the most classic things that I like to talk about is like, a lot of times we see in like the Indian culture, specifically because that's the culture I know the best, we see how like women can never be the initiators. They can never be the ones who hit on the guy, right? We can never be the ones who voice ourselves. And it's not just Indian culture. It happens in a lot of cultures, and it happens
mhm,
even in the Western culture. But then also knowing that scientifically speaking, women are actually the more quote unquote horny of the two gender types, as just as an example, right? Or sex types or whatever you want to call it, right? So
mhm.
so it's so important to address that, like, we have needs. And now, instead of being repressed about it or just be like, oh, you're just a baby maker, like you only have, I remember I once my parents set me up with this guy, right? Oh, this experience, right? I set me up with this guy, and he was like a super traditional Indian guy. And I remember we were having a conversation one day, and he said, like, yeah, so we would only be having sex a couple of times, so we can have children, so we can make children, and then after that, that's not something that we would really be doing. And I was
Mm.
just like, hold up, like, I don't know if you know me, but like, I like to get my.
Those repressed Indians sometimes. That's probably the worst kind, because then he's not like letting himself be. That's really scary. But I think we should probably end this conversation for today because we have a lot of other we have these topics ready to go for the other weeks. Thank you for tuning in. Follow the Yashu Rao follow India.currents, follow me. Problems is probably harder to figure it out. But find us and definitely talk to us about this because I'm very passionate about having these conversations for anybody that wants to have them. And I know Yashu obviously is very passionate too. And definitely join her for her sex education class because I'm sure we could all learn from it. I'm definitely going to try to go to that because it sounds very interesting and I'm sure I will learn something too. So on that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, Yashu, for coming and joining us on this topic of sexuality.
Absolutely. And be sure, guys, to hit the notification little bell at the top of your screen for India Currents so you can find out every single time India Currents is going live and going on doing different topics and different types of information and articles that they release on a daily basis. So be sure to stay
Yes, Yashu writes for us. I just want to put it out there. Yashu writes for us. So if you want, definitely subscribe to India.currents. And also, all of our lives are on our feed. So you will find what we've talked about if you just missed it, because I see some people are coming in right now. We covered quite a lot on sexuality in the Indian culture and actually just in general in America, what that means for us.